Hello, my name is Philip Rulo with Rultract, and today I'm going to walk you through the cleaning and sterilization process of the Rultract Ratchet Rake assembly. Now, the important thing to note here is that this needs to be disassembled into 5 pieces for the cleaning cycle and then reassembled again for sterilization and use. The first step is going to be to remove your rake plate from the snap clip. Go ahead and set that rake plate aside. Be very careful because these rake tips are very sharp. Now, some of the older Rultract rake plates have the cable attached to a hub, which is attached to the rake plate. And if you have an older system like this, you will not remove this rake plate from the hub. Next, we are going to pull the cable from the spool. Note, you do not want to use the crank handle to unwind the cable from the spool because the cable can get kinked inside the spool cap. So while holding your ratchet assembly by the spool, we're going to pull the cable from the spool. Now, if you're not holding your ratchet assembly like this, go ahead and adjust your grip and be sure that you are. So while holding your ratchet assembly by the spool, you're going to pull the cable. If the cable does not come out, you're going to flip your ratchet reverse lever to the opposite side and then go ahead and pull that cable from the spool. A fully exposed cable is 16 inches. Next, we are going to remove our spool cap assembly and crank handle assembly from the gearbox. Now, to do that, you're going to reverse your grip and hold the ratchet assembly by the handle side. Turn your spool cap nut counterclockwise all the way until it comes off. No tools are required. Now you're going to remove your spool cap assembly from your crank handle. And to do that, you just grab the spool and slide it right off. Now you're going to remove the crank handle from the gearbox. Now note that you remove the crank handle from the square hole in the gearbox and not the round hole. So when you go to reassemble it, you have to make sure that you're putting it back into the square hole. Now we are going to separate our spool from our spool cap. And to do that, you want to align the cable access plate screw with the pin and the groove. So you see we have the pin, the screw, and the groove. When you line them up that way, they'll just slide right apart. Now, no further disassembly is required of these pieces for cleaning and sterilization. Next, you're going to be sure that your lock knob is not closed all the way or opened all the way. You want it somewhere right in the middle so that it has some play in it. Now your Rultract ratchet rake assembly is completely disassembled and ready for the cleaning cycle. Following the completion of the cleaning cycle, we are now ready to check for tightness of all fasteners and screws. Now you can see that we disassembled the Rultract ratchet rake assembly into 5 pieces for the cleaning cycle, and we are now ready to reassemble those 5 pieces for sterilization and use. All Rultract trays should have a large and small Allen wrench in them at all times. Now take your large Allen wrench and check for tightness of your cable access plate screws. Now go ahead and check all 4. Next, take your small Allen wrench and check your cable set screw. Now this doesn't have to be over tightened, just make sure that it's tight and very secure. Next, take a flathead screwdriver and check your cable access plate screw. Go ahead and run your finger over that and make sure that it sits flush. Next, you're going to take your large Allen wrench and check the screws of your crank handle assembly. Now you'll check your ratchet cover plate screws. First, we're going to insert the crank handle into the gearbox. Now, you remember when we disassembled this, we removed the crank handle from the square hole. So we want to be sure that we're putting it back into the square hole and not the round hole. Now, there is a square hole here, but that's not the right hole to put this in. Go ahead and put it into the square hole right above the ratchet reversing lever. Make sure that it sits flush. Next, we're going to reassemble our spool cap assembly. Now, to do that, you'll want to note that there is a flat surface on the spool, and the cable needs to hang right over that flat surface of the spool. Then you're going to align that flat surface of the spool with the groove cable guide, and the pieces will just slide easily together. So again, you find the flat surface of the spool, make sure your cable is hanging over that flat surface, and align that with the groove cable guide. Next, you're going to put your spool cap assembly onto your crank handle and gearbox. Now you'll see that there is a pin in the spool cap and there's a groove in the gearbox. This pin has to be inserted into that groove. So go ahead and manipulate your spool cap assembly onto your crank handle and be sure that that pin sits in the groove. Then, while holding your ratchet assembly by the handle side, take your spool cap nut and turn it clockwise all the way and then, while being sure to hold your ratchet assembly by the handle again, tighten this just as tight as you can get it. Now you'll want to be sure that your lock knob is not closed all the way or opened all the way. Again, you want it somewhere right in the middle so it has some play in it. We are now ready to wind the cable into the spool. Now, if you have a rake plate, go ahead and attach it to your snap clip. The reason that you want to do this is the cable will wind uniformly into the spool when there's weight hanging off of the end of it. So what you want to do is to stand up at your desk, hold the ratchet assembly up in the air high enough so that the rake plate is suspended above the desktop. Then go ahead and wind the cable into the spool. You should leave about 2.5 to 3 inches of cable exposed. Now your Rultract ratchet rake assembly has been completely reassembled and ready for sterilization and use.